Hello everyone. So this is the first of a series of videos by Professor Charu, which are focused on demand. So just a little recap so you can remember where we are in our narrative and storytelling. We did the production possibility frontiers, which was a depiction of the choices we had on what an economy could do, but we didn't actually have a good theory about how the economy made those choices. We then took a step back and thought about the circular flow, where we looked about the kinds of relationships that we saw within an economy, where some kind of coordination had to happen so that members of the economy could coordinate their actions to make these decisions about what, how much, and whom, for whom to produce. And that was the circular flow, where we were looking at consumers, producers, input markets, input suppliers, and so on. And then we took a step back and said, there's lots of different ways of doing this. The dominant way of doing it, which is going to be the focus of our course, not exclusively, but majority of the time, is going to be the market mechanism. And that's because in our society, we live in a world where that's the way we do it. It's not the way it's always been done. It's not the way in which every society does it. Even in our society, there's lots of moments where we don't use the market mechanism to decide what, how much, and for whom to produce. If you talk to members of a family, people don't tell you, I look at the market mechanism and see how much money my children can pay before I decide whether I give them food. We don't do that, right? Inside households, we actually don't use market mechanisms. And we'd be kind of creeped out if people used market mechanisms and prices and money to talk about the relationship between their parents, themselves, their grandma, whatever, right? It's not just that the market mechanism isn't used everywhere, it's that all of us actually have ideas about where it should be used and where it shouldn't be used. The simplest way to think of a market mechanism is to think of multiple types of markets. And we're going to start with the simplest one, the one that most of us are familiar with and have experienced. Markets in final goods and services. These are the markets where people buying things like apples, oranges, newspapers, milk, ordinary everyday final goods and services as consumers, meet people who are selling these ordinary everyday goods and services. But our first market mechanism, therefore, is going to be what is called the very simple, basic, competitive market of supply and demand. Consumers buying final goods and services, meeting producers selling final goods and services. This is not the way in which other markets, say labor markets, where people selling their labor meet firms buying their labor, financial markets. So let's start now with the simplest of markets, where consumers meet producers, the supply and demand market. One of the things we're trying to figure out, which is the economic question, is the question of coordination. Millions of people individually making individual decisions. How does all of this work out? How does somebody know that I want to buy milk and make sure that milk is supplied to Rite Aid at the right time so that when I go there, the milk is there and I can buy it at that price? And the answer is the coordination is done through the institution of markets. And we need to therefore understand how that works. Our understanding is that this is an institution that will end up coordinating decisions between two groups of people, consumers and producers, who actually do not know each other. And this is quite crucial. So the first thing we're going to say is the ordinary everyday consumer is somebody who makes consumption decisions by looking at prices and deciding how much to buy. In other words, what we're saying is the ordinary consumer decides what to buy. Q, quantity, demanded D, as a result of just looking at the prices. X just stands for the good. In this case, I'm maybe going to talk about milk. So quantity demanded of good X is a function of the price of good X. And then I'm going to add this sentence here, ceteris paribus. And that just means other things equal. What this means is, of course, I know how much milk I buy. Depends on a lot of things beyond the price of milk. But I'm going to call that ceteris paribus, which means I'm just going to hold all that constant for now. So it's like saying, setting my stage, all of that constant, the main determinant of how much milk I buy will depend on the price of milk. I go into the market, I look at the price of milk, and I decide how much to buy. So quantity demanded is a function of the price of milk.